Yes.
All right. Well, let me go ahead and introduce the podcast, and then I'll introduce you, and then we'll chat about what we're going to chat about. Hey, everybody. I'm Jim Schneider, and this is Work in Progress, my video podcast where I talk to my friends about the work that they do and why they do it. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by my good friend Kain Osterholt. Kain is a professional engineer with more than a decade of experience in Bitcoin and blockchain technology. Specializing in computer graphics and video technologies, Kain has held leadership positions at companies such as Apple and Digital Domain. He is a registered inventor with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, recognized for his technological innovation and ability to push the boundaries of human ingenuity. An early adopter of cryptocurrency, Kain's years of experience with Bitcoin and blockchain technology have enabled him to share the lessons he's learned with newcomers to the cryptocurrency space. And that is precisely what Kain aims to do in his book, Blockhead. In Blockhead, Kain explores the history of money and markets, today's evolving economy, and the future possibilities for the cryptocurrency landscape. Blockhead is scheduled for publication in early 2024 and will be available in hardcover, paperback, and ebook formats. Links to where you can find Kain online and where you can purchase Blockhead are included in the description of this video below. Kain, welcome back to Work in Progress. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thanks, James.
Looking sharp. Let's start with, maybe it's a basic question, but it's an important one for anyone who's going to read a book about Bitcoin and blockchain, especially a newcomer to the space. What is blockchain?
It's a good question.
Yeah, if you can just explain it succinctly, how would you explain it?
Yeah, so the blockchain, when it comes to a cryptocurrency, is actually a very small component, relatively speaking, given the system of a cryptocurrency includes much more than just a blockchain. Mm-hmm. But the blockchain itself is the ledger component that keeps track of all the transactions.
Okay.
The blockchain, however, is designed to fit into a greater system that becomes more effectively a decentralized form of money, mm-hmm. or a form of transactions that can be kept on a ledger such that no one is in charge of that ledger and no one mm-hmm. can tamper with that ledger, mm-hmm. Without having some kind of massive availability to the entire ecosystem, mm-hmm. In terms of being able to manipulate it. So the design of the blockchain is what fits into a bigger structure that allows for an architecture that is decentralized. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it popular in cryptocurrencies today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin came about in 2009. It was launched by a pseudonymous individual, Satoshi Nakamoto. Mm-hmm. And I believe the date was January 3rd, 2009, with the first block, which is called the Genesis block. And so that's the block in blockchain, the chain of blocks being new blocks added on to the previous block to keep track of all the transactions. Uh-huh. This individual or group, if it was a group, started the blockchain with the Genesis block at the time, with the purpose of creating a decentralized money. And the white paper, as it's called, which is like an initial spec for the system, mm-hmm. Goes through the philosophy behind a decentralized form of cash that can be transacted amongst individuals without the need to worry about a singular counterparty that could tamper with your database or blockchain as it is now. Mm-hmm. So blockchain is, you can think of it like the database in the system of money that is Bitcoin.
Okay, so we see Bitcoin coming about in 2009.
Right.
Blockchain precedes Bitcoin.
Right.
By how much time? When was blockchain developed?
I actually don't know the answer to that, but a blockchain itself is a data structure that could have been invented much earlier than Bitcoin itself, because Bitcoin is not only an architectural invention, but it's also the implementation of it that's important. So the fact that it started in 2009 as a not so big network, a very small amount of people were involved in that launch. But as it grew gradually, it fanned out to more decentralized nodes, as they're called. And those nodes that keep track of the ledger, the blockchain in particular, the copy of the blockchain that is spread throughout the world, started to take hold. And so that system is now what we call Bitcoin. But Bitcoin, the software and the architecture, was open source from the get-go. And so it's something that anyone can copy and make a version of their own. They typically call it something other than Bitcoin to disambiguate.
Some examples would be?
Well, like one of the first notable examples was Litecoin, which is still around.
Yeah.
There's another one, I think that was the first altcoin, it's called, which is a non-Bitcoin blockchain-based cryptocurrency. One of the first I remember was called Namecoin, but it's no longer around anymore, and so, or at least it's not popular anymore. So Litecoin is one that's still around that is often used as a test bed for new features that might make it into the Bitcoin main network as well. So that's an interesting one that's a little bit older. A little bit newer than Litecoin is Ethereum, which introduced smart contracts, which is another technology layer on top of blockchain that allows for smarter use of blockchain, if you want to think about it that way, adding intelligence to the blockchain in the form of rules and regulations that can be programmed into the blockchain was introduced by Ethereum, and many others have come about since then. But
Dogecoin, for example.
yeah, Dogecoin's still very popular, and
It's an altcoin.
it's an altcoin, which started as a bit of a joke, a joke that was meant to mock Bitcoin to a certain degree, but turned out to be popular on its own right, and now has a fan base, a following, and some pretty big players in technology, as you know, Elon Musk. Also, other billionaires have also entered the space and have promoted coins like Dogecoin. It's another one of those interesting aspects of cryptocurrency, the evolution of our economy, and how people have interacted with these new nascent systems that really, I think, are starting to capture a lot more of the attention of the mainstream. And so as that whole process evolves, there may be many new coins, new ideas out there that we still haven't seen yet. It's still very early in the space. And I think that to think that we're anywhere near the end of the road in terms of figuring out what can be done with this technology, I think it's really better to think of it as the early days, still, even now.
And speaking of early days, so you were an early adopter of cryptocurrency. And how early are we talking? When and how did you get started playing around with Bitcoin?
Yeah, it was the middle of 2011 was when I first discovered about, I first heard about Bitcoin through my dad at a family event. He had seen some article on it and mentioned it, and it was a short mention, and I didn't even know what it was. But when I went back to my home office and started doing some research, I quickly gravitated to it because at the time, in 2011, We had just gone through the great financial crisis
Yeah.
in 2008, 2009. I had purchased my first home in 2008. So this was something that affected me personally, and also just my family and friends and everyone around us was affected by this. And so, so these new forms of money and these new sort of almost activist approaches to the economy started to pop up. And that's when Max Kaiser came on the scene, Peter Schiff, of course. They would debate often about what was best for the economy going forward and whether or not we were living in a system that was too corrupt. Of course, the Occupy Wall Street movement at the time got me really curious about the economy. And that's why I went from being totally focused on engineering and the sciences to suddenly having kind of an awakening moment to the zeitgeist and what was going on in the economy and money, trying to understand, what is fractional reserve banking, what does it mean to have a fixed supply in terms of how Bitcoin was designed from the get-go. That's also in the white paper, and the incentive structures around money as well. So it really woke me up to that scene in 2011 when Bitcoin was around $15. And
just for some perspective, right now, at that time it was around $15. Where is it at now?
Yeah, today,
roughly.
I think I checked earlier, and it was roughly around $37,000 and some change.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So if you got in early, and bought at $15 per coin, and hung on to it, you're probably doing pretty well financially.
Yeah, and I would say not a lot of people were able to do that.
Right.
There's a joke in the Bitcoin community that kind of I'm paraphrasing, but the richest people in Bitcoin are either dead or lost their private keys because they bought the Bitcoin but didn't know how to hold on to it. Those who had the private keys very often would have sold it or traded it and ended up not holding on to what would now today be of far greater value. So there are stories of people that have some hard drive out in a landfill somewhere and they're trying to dig it up. Hilarious things like that. But as for me, I was lucky enough to hold on to a few for a number of years. But I also sold most of mine, even the ones that I mined, because I created a miner early on as well in 2011. And I think I was mining about 6 Bitcoin per month with a basic GPU miner that only cost a few $100.
Yeah.
And, back then I was doing the accounting and thinking, oh, this isn't even covering my electricity costs.
Right.
But had I kept the 6 Bitcoin a month, certainly would have covered the electricity by now.
Yeah, well, hindsight is 20/20, right?
Yeah.
So what made you want to write a book about Bitcoin and your experience with it and your ideas about it?
Yeah, I think in early 2022 was the moment that I had the idea to start writing about Bitcoin. And I immediately thought a book would be the right format because I realized that I had a lot of history with this space going back to 2011, and I figured there's definitely enough material here in my head, given all the history I've had with this asset class and the space and the evolution of social media and the kind of social component. And so what I started to notice is that so many new people had come in, and not just into Bitcoin, but many of the altcoins as well. And to me, it seemed like there was a lot of confusion over what the value proposition is and why people should invest in it. And the debate goes on and on. And I realized that a lot of people just don't have the perspective on the early days and the investment throughout that time period, the kind of investment experience throughout those times. as it pertains to where we ended up today. And I think that's really the purpose of the book, is to give people that aren't necessarily Bitcoin experts, but people who are interested in investing in this stuff, getting into it technologically. Now there are jobs out there. You can work in the field of blockchain technology. Whether you want to invest your time in this, I think it's important to get some perspective on the history and kind of understand what the value proposition of the whole space is. I wanted to get that out on in a format that I think really helps to represent where I think this whole space is going, why I got into it in the first place, and how it's changed over the years. Really would help a lot of people, and many more people are not into this stuff than are into this stuff, still to this day.
Sure.
And so I think for those who are coming in or seeing this thing from afar and maybe a little confused about it, don't really fully understand it, but know just enough that they might want to dive in, this is a great book for them, because it really goes through the experience of literally knowing nothing, discovering it, and then kind of plowing through all the years of change and evolution up until about 2022, which is when I ended the timeline for the book.
Yeah, and the writing process,
Right.
essentially, or the bulk of the writing process, because you did some editing afterwards, but
Yeah.
Okay, so your target audience is newcomers to the cryptocurrency space, people who are interested in maybe investing or just learning more about it. Do they need to come in with any knowledge about blockchain or any specifics, any more sort of inside baseball terminology, or do you help break that down for readers?
Yeah, I do help break it down a bit with a glossary.
Yeah.
There's a terms and definitions, kind of deeper dive on some of the topics that tend to be slang or jargon that's only used within the cryptocurrency space. But it's not meant to be a beginner's book from the very ground level. So a little bit of an understanding of some of the topics and blockchain and Bitcoin would be good for a reader. But there is a chapter that goes into the basics to try to help out in understanding some of the terms and definitions before diving in, because I refer to a lot of those things a lot throughout the book, and I feel like there's some really important ones fundamentally to understand if anyone wants to have a chance at really understanding the value proposition and the evolution of the space and where it might go from here and what its purpose is.
Okay, so walk me through the content of the book a little bit. Tell me how you've laid out the structure, and what can readers expect to learn?
Sure. So because the purpose is to give the reader an understanding of where this all fits in to the history of money and what money is really for, and how it affects us in our daily lives, there's a little bit of history to begin with on the evolution of the digital age, as I'm calling it. So a little bit of history going back well before Bitcoin and even the internet. Because I really think to understand Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, there needs to be a pretty good understanding of how the internet came to be.
Sure.
Because the internet is the base layer for the technology. And so understanding that first, and also understanding a little bit about our value systems and how they also influence our capital markets and the way we go about our economic activities. This is something that I think is very important to have a primer on, at least, and I think any interest in that could certainly lead to reading other books and other materials on those topics. But the basic primer to get into what is money and how do we use it and why did it get here and all this complexity, when in fact a lot of people kind of take it for granted and don't really even want to know, who's in control of the money and how does this system all work. I think if someone is going to get into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, it makes sense to understand a little bit about why money has evolved the way it has over the years.
Sure.
And so that's the first kind of part out of three. So there's three parts.
Okay.
The second part goes into all of the cycles of Bitcoin, and a cycle is defined to be a hype phase that causes an overvaluation period, also known as a bubble. So I believe that there are 4 of those that have been pretty well defined by other analysts as well, but it's not always fully agreed upon what a Bitcoin cycle was, but I see 4 of them pretty clearly to be able to structure it that way and break it down into 4 up and down cycles.
Sure. So essentially, you're looking at an inflated bubble, and then the bursting of that bubble, and then the reinflation, and you've identified 4 of those so far. So then that means we're currently in the 5th cycle, maybe.
Yeah.
Or are we in the 4th?
It's debatable whether we're in the end of the 4th, going into the bear market, and at this point, it has been enough time to start to look at potentially moving into a 5th bull market cycle. I do have some issues with that, so some uncertainty around that that I talk about in the final chapter, chapter 10. Because of the policies of the central bank and some of the issues we're having with natural resources around the world. Inflation and rate hike cycles also play a big role in this whole process.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a challenging one going forward. But we're definitely either at the end of the 4th cycle, possibly going into the 5th. So the book ends with some attempts to understand where we're going in the future based on these policies at the Federal Reserve and elsewhere around the world. There's also the SEC and regulatory concerns.
Sure.
And right now we're in this heated debate over whether an ETF is going to be approved. So that's an interesting development. But regardless of specific speculation, I think that there probably will be a 5th cycle in due time, and we'll be maybe talking about a sequel to the book at that point.
Yeah, yeah. And so part 3 would include, potential future outcomes, right? So maybe some predictions that you have. Is there what other kind of content do you have in part 3 of the book?
Yeah, one of the big things I wanted to get across in the book is lessons that I've learned along the way.
Yeah.
Because really, as I said earlier, who this book is for is newcomers to the space. And by newcomer, I don't mean someone who just saw the price of Bitcoin for the first time and is getting excited about making a bunch of money necessarily. Not someone who isn't able to speak clearly about these concepts like blockchain necessarily. It's more so someone who's maybe been in for less than a year, but knows a thing or two about trading it, obtaining it, but needs a little help in understanding the bigger picture, right? So
I imagine this is the kind of book that you would have read, or you would have liked to have read in your, first year of, getting a stronger grasp on the economy and Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. It's like taking all the parts that I learned over the course of over a decade that I think were really important lessons, and wrapping it up in a package that someone can kind of take the shortcut on and say, what lessons do I really need to learn about this space in order to be effective at making good decisions, about risk, about investment, about why this is an important invention. Should I get into the technology and build blockchain technology? These are all questions that I sort of try to answer throughout the book and give someone a perspective on. So I really hope that people who are already into this space quite a bit also get something out of it. Because there are people who've been in the space for, let's say 5 years, who may have skipped over something that is really important to understanding the history and the evolution of how we got here. And so I do think that beginners might get more out of it, but then again, veterans may learn a thing or two as well. So.
Sure, at least have the opportunity to engage with your ideas, potentially agree, potentially disagree, but I'm sure they would find it an entertaining read, whether they're learning something new or just, gaining insight into what you think about Bitcoin.
There's also an entertaining aspect I try to weave in there because reading should be entertaining.
Sure.
And so a lot of it is a story about me as well. And I think what's funny about these economic cycles is that when I wrote the book and when I really started to go back in time and look at my history with Bitcoin and crypto and investing, it made me realize that some of the aspects of my life actually followed the ups and downs of the roller coaster as well.
Yeah.
Like life goes in these cycles as well. So the fact that some of that had some synchronicity to it was kind of interesting and should be entertaining for readers who want to see what it's like to go through the depression of a bear market while also, say, losing a loved one or missing out on an opportunity or changing your life in a big way.
Sure.
Those are all interesting aspects of life that come up at times when we start to make different decisions about investing or our career, which is what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
And so I find that to be quite interesting as well, and I hope that adds an entertainment component to it.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. There's a personal side to it, so there's a memoir quality of the book.
Exactly.
So what was the writing process like for you? Because this is your first book, right? So how did you find the writing process? It's no easy task to write a book. So what were some of the challenges and pitfalls, and how did you plan your writing day? How much time did you put into it per day? What were your writer habits like?
Yeah, it's a good question because
you can answer any of those, or whichever one strikes you most.
It's been a while since I looked at it, but I originally had a spreadsheet that I started with that helped me track my hours. I wanted to see how many words I was writing per hour.
Yeah.
And then try to calculate if I had a word goal for the book, which was around 50,000 words, how much longer would it take me to get there? And now it's kind of funny to think about because the first draft of the manuscript, took me a certain amount of hours, but then it was all the hours put into all the rest of the book that aren't accounted for in that spreadsheet. But going back to the original writing process, I would, first of all, I should say that I resigned from a full-time job at Apple in early 2022, and that freed me up quite a bit to take a vocational kind of job, and this was a big part of that. So I thought, I have some time off here. I was in transition to move to Malaysia, which is where we are now, and so it was this free time that I wanted to fill with a little bit of writing and see if I could put my skills to the test and create an entire manuscript for a book. And was able to accomplish that, but then quickly realized that I needed some help. And so I then thought about, who could I, talk to get some help, maybe editing or advising on some of the structure here, some of the storytelling. And that's when I called you back.
That's right.
So, and then we started, a more kind of working relationship on the project, and that really helped me pull together, a real manuscript to submit for publication. But so far, I am surprised at how much more work goes into the tasks after the original manuscript.
Right.
Because the free-flowing sort of writing that comes through on your first manuscript, it's more fun and relaxing and simple, because it's exactly what you want to get on paper. Some of it's a little challenging because you have to go back and dig deep in your email box or something for like an old receipt to figure out,
yeah.
when did I buy that thing?
Yeah.
And so some of the book is very historical in that way. But then you get into all the process of editing, proofreading. It gets into the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, down to the periods and the commas,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of decisions to be made in that time, and shifting around of ideas. And
Yeah.
so, what advice do you have for any wannabe writers out there? If somebody wants to write a book, whether it's one similar to yours that's focused on a topic like Bitcoin and research-oriented, or something that's more memoir-driven, or maybe, it could be a work of fiction. Do you have any advice for writers?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the first thing I would say is think about the books that you've really enjoyed to read first, and read more.
Yeah.
Because one of the things
Definitely.
I did when I had a lot of free time is I bought a bunch of books, or I had books on my bookshelf that I hadn't had a chance to read yet. And I spent a lot more time reading them, and realized that this was an art that I thought I could actually be a part of, right? Like, I want to create some of this art. And once you're inspired to do it, I think it becomes a lot easier, because you're going to need inspiration to get over the really challenging aspects. And it's a long journey. I think we're sitting here now, almost 2 years later after I started. Not quite, but maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, going on 2 years, sure.
And so certainly that first manuscript, it kind of comes out, it's a challenge, but it's at least your own kind of solo project. But you're going to want to have that motivation to take it over the edge and really push over the challenging aspects. Things like, for example, I ended up with about 24 images in the book, and I had to meticulously make sure that every image was accurate, that the data was correct. I had to draw them by hand, some of the charts, and there's a lot of tedium in there.
Sure.
But it's all worth it in the end, as long as I think you can keep that motivated mindset to get through the full project. And I think inspiration really helps with that. So,
well, and so on the topic of inspiration, because you mentioned having read a few books that inspired you, would you share a couple of titles that really made you want to write, or really inspired you?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the books that really inspired this one, and also act as great companions to the book, I think are two books in particular. One of them is The Bitcoin Standard by Safety Namus, and that one really goes into more deeply the economic implications of Bitcoin, and also some of the history of money. More deeply than my book does. So it makes a good companion for anyone who's more interested in that history and the actual field of economics, because it is, in my view, an economics book.
Sure.
And then the other one that I remember from quite a while ago is a book called Mastering Bitcoin, and that one's by Andreas Antonopoulos. who is another OG in the space, who made that book open source, I believe. So I think the ebook is on GitHub, but I think I bought an ebook copy and read it back in, I think it was 2016.
Oh, okay.
And that one is more so about the technology. So anyone who's more interested from the engineering perspective wants to really get a better understanding of how Bitcoin really works.
Yeah.
Antonopoulos also wrote Mastering Ethereum. So he also kind of laid out how to deal with smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain as well. Just deep into the technology in a way that can get someone a good understanding of the technological layer and how to actually develop software on it. Those books, I think, act as really good companions for people that would want to do a deeper dive into those aspects. Maybe even for now, in the times that we're living in currently, with the way as I mentioned earlier, the central bank policy is situated.
Yeah.
I think Ray Dalio's Changing World Order book that recently came out as well is also a great companion, even though it really doesn't talk about Bitcoin all that much. Just from an economics perspective, I think it's a great system that's been developed to understand how the full macro cycles work. And so how that fits into the Bitcoin cycles, I think is something that a reader of that book would have to make their own kind of connections to, but also a great one that helped inspire me to write when I was looking at writing this book early on. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And we talked before about the third part of your book touches on maybe some predictions about the future of Bitcoin, perhaps the economy itself. So what are some predictions you're willing to make now in this moment about, let's say, 2024?
Yeah, I think 2024 could end up being the year where we start to sort of capitulate into a recession in the United States and also other places around the globe. There are signals right now suggesting such, but confirmation is key, and I think predictions are really, really challenging at this point because of all the uncertainty that's baked into the world conflicts we currently have, and also how these policymakers can intervene and change the global landscape overnight with new programs. And so it's very hard to say whether or not something will come along to change that outlook. And that's what makes it hard to predict. But at the same time, I'm actually hopeful that we'll gain more efficiency in the near future if we go through a phase of kind of cleaning out the zombie companies. The problems in our system now tend to come from inefficiencies that I think have grown and grown as a result of some of the policies that didn't want to allow a recession to occur.
Yeah.
As a result of that, I think we just have a lot of inefficiencies that, if are able to get cleaned out, we will end up on a much cleaner footing, a much stronger footing that could propel us into a much brighter future. So on the longer term, I'm still very optimistic. In the shorter term, I think that we might need to go through one of those wipeout phases. And so that could be challenging and difficult for a lot of people. But, we just went through a pandemic. We went through high inflation, and we still have inflation as a problem to solve in the US and in other places. So I think that there's still going to need to be some time to normalize things as we try to figure out how to pick the pieces up from the pandemic and readjust policies and the economy as a whole to kind of start humming along again in some kind of stable fashion.
Uh-huh.
Until then, I think the best prediction to make is that of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Uncertainty is always a fair prediction to make, I think. Yeah. It's a safe prediction to make. The future is uncertain. But it's good to hear the words hope and optimism in your answer as well. Okay. And having said that, ending on that message of long-term hope and optimism, where can people find you online if they want to, learn more about you, if they want to read other things that you're writing on and discovering about Bitcoin, about the economy? Where can people go to, find your wisdom?
Sure. So I'm on X. My handle on X is Darkly Energized. My username, if you want to find me, and you can probably put a link below.
Yep, there will be a link in the description below.
Yeah, it's K-A-1-N-0-S, Kain Os. So that's been my username since the beginning. And the name is Darkly Energized. So I also have free and open source indicators on TradingView. I have a Substack, also Darkly Energized Substack. So those are three main areas I'm focused on now. And I hope people come and use the free and open source indicators and provide feedback, and usually willing to have discussion on X and reply to most comments. But looking out for what's next in the economy and keeping that discussion going on both X and Substack, with a weekly Substack that goes into liquidity for the most part, central bank policy, and what might come of that in the economy. So those are the areas I'm focused on where people can come join me.
Okay, great. And then again, links to all of those spaces that Kain mentioned will be in the description below. If you enjoyed our podcast today, make sure you do check him out and learn more about him. And of course, the link to purchase Kain's book, Blockhead, will also be included in the link below. And I'm sure you'd be happy if our audience members, our viewers, purchased that, right, in either ebook, hardcover, or paperback form.
That's right.
And any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave the audience with?
I think just that even though an uncertain time seems to be ahead of us, I am still optimistic. And even though my name is Darkly Energized, it doesn't mean that I'm always just dark and gloomy about everything. And I think that
in knowing Kain personally, I can attest to that.
Keeping things in perspective, but being realistic about everything going forward, and keeping a strong, optimistic approach to even the worst of times. I think, laughing once in a while and joking around about things can help with that. But hopefully we come out of whatever uncertain situations and difficult situations with the mindset that we can make a better future.
I love it. Okay. Kain, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching, and links below. Check them out. See you next time on Work in Progress.